Okay.
Hello.
Hey, Nick. You doing?
Was that working? Oh dear.
Oh, yeah, no, it's working. All good.
Default. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, you can hear me. Yeah?
Yeah, perfect. It's all good.
I can't hear you for some reason.
Oh, really? Oh.
Oh no. Yep, sorry. It doesn't come through the speakers on this system. Yeah. Try again.
Okay, fine. Yeah, is that any better? Beth in the
That's it.
chat says it's good.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. No, I forgot. It's the it doesn't take it through the speakers on this, which is a bit odd. What's the best shed-based substrate? Let me tell you about shed-based. Yeah, Simon, I've got a thing or two about that.
I'm lost already.
Oh, this is Anna. Anna's redoing at the moment.
Oh, right, okay.
This is an epic remodeling of the garden, the likes of which you've never seen.
Yeah,
It's
yeah. You were
incredible.
telling me she was, getting quite a lot of stuff done, so that's good.
She's done the grass today. She's laid about 38 square meters of turf. So she's in the end
Perfect.
stretch now, which is good.
That's great. We're going to have lots of questions lined up about that, I'm sure.
I've got the neighbours coming round asking if they can come do their garden. It's really good. It's
yeah. If this SEO thing doesn't work out, then
yeah, right. Landscaping for sure. I think it's going to join Nick Duddy. He's going to model spoons and make whittlings, and I'm going to do landscaping.
Yeah,
be great.
Sure.
Have you managed? You look like you've almost got a haircut.
I've actually just taken clippers to my own head, which I'm not sure I'd recommend, but it's either that or get overgrown. It's too hot at the moment. So
I live with my hairdresser, so this kind of situation normal, really. So, but yeah, I got her away from the garden to give me a haircut, which is good.
Perfect. Okay, so we've got some people joining us. I think let's just jump straight into it and let's go from there. So thanks for everyone in the room. If you've got any questions about Google Data Studio, Nick's presentation, or gardening, if you've just caught some of our conversation, then feel free to put them in the session chat and Nick will cover them afterwards. Otherwise, I'll leave it to Nick to go into the presentation and talk to us about Google Data Studio. The one last tip actually is if you're watching, double click on the slides and then that's viewer. That's bigger. And I'll remove my camera because you don't need to see me and join you at the end.
Okay. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. I imagine you're probably getting a bit of death by PowerPoint at the moment. So what I'll do is I'll try to end this a little bit early and go into more engaging kind of questions. So as a lot of you know, I work in enterprise SEO. I work with a lot of big businesses, and this talk is about DataStudio and why I love DataStudio. But it's not really the normal kind of talk about individual reports you can generate in DataStudio. It's more about what are the overall strategic SEO objectives with DataStudio? How do I use it to get things done? Which is I find a kind of different perspective on DataStudio. As Kevin said, SEO is really an execution problem at the moment. It's not a knowledge problem. It's kind of how do we get stuff done? That's a polite version for you, Barry. But how do we get things done? And this is a real question. This is how you can use DataStudio to really move things in large companies. I think any company really, but especially in those companies where it's just been impossible to really move the needle. And the way we do that is, first of all, we have an understanding of strategy versus tactics. So Ariane here wrote a really good article. I put a lot of bit.ly links in here so you can follow up on these slides. And also, I'll share the deck with you after this talk. So Ariane wrote an article recently in Search Engine Journal, and she kind of talked about tactics and strategy. And I think this is something that a lot of SEOs need to think about and understand better, because we do tend to get confused between the terms, and we tend to use them interchangeably. They really are very different things. As I say here with her abridged comment that she got from someone else, tactics are really how you win the battle, but strategy is how you win the war. So your strategy and your strategic approach to SEO has to be far wider than individual tactics such as link recovery or AMP or these are individual tactics. Your strategy for AMP would be, how do I increase page performance? You shouldn't go down to the individual layer of tactics quite yet. And that's how you first have to approach DataStudio. Is how do I use DataStudio to fix certain key objectives that I may have in the SEO department? Don't immediately jump to a report, because the reports are very interesting and they're fantastic, but they're tactical, they're not strategic. So let's look at 3 strategic objectives that you may have for your SEO capability in your team. And these are things that came up regularly for me over the last few years, so I think it may be familiar to you. When we go into the question session, we can talk about use cases that you've had and share a bit of knowledge there. But the first use case that I've often had is how do you increase analytics capability across the SEO channel? And the struggle here has often been that you don't have budget. Tools are very expensive, but you know that SEO has to be data driven. So what's a good solution to go forward to address this issue? Use case 2, to align SEO activity to commercial metrics. We know that SEO wants to be a grown-up channel. It is a grown-up channel. How do we really convince senior management that it's aligned to their commercial metrics and goals that they have for the organization? And I think DataStudio is absolutely crucial in this. Use case 3, to ensure that SEO recommendations are prioritized. So we can recommend things all day long, but if nothing ever happens on our audits, then the SEO activity fails. So these are kind of 3 key objectives, and I think DataStudio is a fantastic tactic to use to meet these objectives. Why DataStudio? It's all about, there are other data visualization products out there, obviously Tableau, Power BI. If you're being completely honest, you'd say that those are a lot more powerful, and your data team would certainly come back and say, they'd use those hands down over DataStudio. But DataStudio is free, which is a massive factor, and it's really kind of democratizing data in the same way that Uber has democratized and brought taxis to the masses. DataStudio is really bringing data visualization and analytics to the masses. There's a wide range of community connectors and reports that are available. I'll touch on some of those that are out there, but it seems that a new connector, a new report comes out on an almost daily basis at the moment, which is fantastic. So much like the WordPress ecosystem, where you're building on the shoulders of giants, people have created really fantastic reports, and you can simply import these into your DataStudio and start working on them, just changing the data sources. And that kind of leads to the next point, where it's a really easy learning curve to DataStudio. And I'm saying this honestly, it's I think some people think that DataStudio is something that's reserved for the data team or the analytics team. It's really something you can get your head around incredibly fast. You're talking a couple of weeks to get, or even less, to get something up and running. I'd challenge anyone really to take this deck and produce some Search Console reports pretty much within a couple of hours. So Jerry White has pointed to a really good article here in terms of optimizing your Spotify data. So you can start to bring in your Spotify data, visualize it through DataStudio, and really learn how it works. But it is a very easy thing to learn. I've also linked to Lee's book, which came out recently, which is absolutely fantastic. And chapter 9 is awesome in terms of performance, where he gives you some really useful tips in terms of speeding up some of your data sources and making your reports faster. And the final point is there's a really clear development path to your data projects by following this route, because we got DataStudio, but obviously you've got Google Sheets, you've got BigQuery, and this is leading into some very interesting connections to their machine learning and AI backends. So this is a data approach that's going to grow with your knowledge. You're not going to reach the limitations very fast. So let's look at the use cases. So use case 1, to increase analytics capability across the SEO channel. Now, this is pretty much my data plan that I've been working on for the last couple of years. It's pretty simple. And the idea is that we have data, and data comes to us in various forms. We have it in the SEO tools that we all use, in Deepcrawl, in SEMrush, in SEO Monitor. And we take this data from those tools and we import it. We take it from that layer into initially into your visualization there. So you take it into the DataStudio reports and visualize it through the community connectors. That's something you can do almost immediately. To take this plan further, you then have to consider data storage. So how do we store our data from our third-party tools into BigQuery, into Google Sheets, and then we visualize it in DataStudio? So that's a more advanced part of that plan. Now, why are we following this plan is quite an interesting thing. It gives you a very different perspective on your data management, because so many of these tools are trying to get you to take your data and put it into their tool. They want you to import your often very commercially sensitive data into their tool, bring it into Adobe Analytics. SEO tools want you to bring it into their SEO tools, but there are limitations with this. You can see here that people have got very excited. There's 198 likes on this. This came out today by Cyrus, which is interesting because it's a tool that looks at your Lighthouse data, and then it brings in your commercial data, and then it merges these two together and it gives you the insight. Now, if you think about the plan that I just laid out, it would make far more sense for you to bring the Lighthouse data into your own repository and to bring in your commercial data into that repository, because you probably have that in Google Analytics. So you can actually bring those data into your own control, your own management. And this is about owning your first-party data and having it under your control. And that's why I think that approach that I've laid out is far more sustainable roadmap, really, to development, rather than leaning on so many of these third-party tools. It's scalable. We're going to go a long way with that. And the final point is you'll often reduce your costs for third-party tools when you follow this approach, because you're looking at them purely in terms of their costs on the API to bring that data into DataStudio. You don't have to worry about additional licensing or additional seats, because the data then comes into your control and you don't need to then worry about additional licensing to access and use that data. So it's a very good way forward. And the first place that everyone starts is Search Console, because this is your most accessible first-party data source. It's from it's Google. So how do we kind of use this better? And you've seen some kind of quite interesting visualizations like this. This is a report that I put together, and it's kind of interesting, but it's not telling you a huge amount more than you get from the Search Console screens itself. But there are better things you can do with this, and I'll kind of take you into those and why we do them. But bringing it into DataStudio then provides a justification for example, getting the domain property set up, which is very important at the moment in Search Console. So you can verify your domains on an address level or on a domain level. If you do it on the domain level, you have to add a TXT record to the DNS. But after you've done that, you have access to all of the subdomains, you have access to the HTTP, the HTTPS, all the different variants of your URLs are all accessible in one data stream. And then you can bring that data stream and visualize it in some quite interesting ways in DataStudio. For example, you want to see your HTTP versus HTTPS impressions, because if you're getting impressions on HTTP and you've migrated, then something's going wrong. So it gives you far more flexibility in terms of what you can do with that data source. It gets more interesting. I've kind of mocked up a report here for the Upload conference. So this is data that I brought in, and I've got a very simple report here that I built. I'm actually going to share all of these reports after this talk, so if you'd like to have a go with them, you can. Now, the advantage to this report over accessing the data through Search Console is that in Search Console, we can access and export 1,000 rows per day for each day period. But if we actually bring it in via the community connector into DataStudio, which is literally a 5-minute job, if you have this report, you can then set the date and you can download 5,000 rows of data. So immediately you have 5 times the amount of data with that small change. So you can see that gives you far more data, it's far more useful, and you're kind of bringing this data into your own control. Obviously, if you're only visualizing it through DataStudio, then you are still stuck with the limitations of the main Search Console platform, in that after 16 months, it's a rolling 16 months of data that they store. So to take this to the next stage, you really need to consider, how do you store that data? How do we bring that into BigQuery and build up a database made up of months and years of data? And having that increased amount of data starts to get very useful, because you end up with a first-party tool that will give you far more insight into your keyword universe than any of the sort of accessible commercial SEO tools that are out there. And certainly a lot of the in-house guys that have built up this approach and have a year plus worth of data, they're getting some very interesting output from this. If you bring the data into BigQuery via the API, you can bring in up to 50,000 rows per day. So you can see here, you've gone from 1,000 rows with the normal access to 50,000 rows by bringing it via the API. So it's a big step change. As David, though, says, because obviously data has some costs, and when you start bringing it into BigQuery, you're going to start running up some costs by doing it. It stops being free and it starts to incur something, but it isn't incredibly expensive. I found that we've been spending as a kickoff to this 120, 150 pounds per month. So it's very cheap when you get to this level, and that would be importing log file data, Search Console data, and various other bits into BigQuery. As David says, you want to get around that cost issue, then 10 to 15,000 keywords per day gives him 70 to 80% of his data. So you have to think that 50,000 rows may not be necessary. So do some testing and work out exactly how much of this data you want to bring in, how many rows you want to bring in each day. But obviously this approach gives you far more flexibility in that. If you want to kind of get a glimpse at what 50,000 rows of your data looks like right now, then amazingly, Lino actually has a free tool that lets you do that. So if you go to this address, you can get your 50,000 rows and then download it. And I guess technically you could take the 50,000 rows and put it into Google Sheets each day and build up your own database, but that'd be incredibly time consuming. But that will actually give you a glimpse of what you can get by having an increased amount of data from Search Console. But I mentioned that a lot of people have created reports already, and this is one of the great strengths in DataStudio. And this kind of gets you around the problem of expense and tool budget, because you can simply download these pre-made reports, and as I said, there seems to be a new one coming out almost on a daily basis at the moment, and start building up your own insight. Hannah's built a fantastic, this is version 2 of a Search Console or Explorer Studio. So go and have a look at this, but you start to kind of use these different sources of data that you have and then build your own SEO tools. And this is what DataStudio is. DataStudio is just another SEO tool, really, that you can build yourself. We've got here a report on AMP URL performance, because this comes up quite a lot in terms of people have deployed AMP, and they want to know how that's affecting and the benefits they're getting from that. So this, again, is a fantastic report to start with. Michael, who does some amazing work. If you just go to his website, you're going to find dozens of really useful reports that you can integrate. This one measures page scrolling, which again can be a useful kind of POC to test. And I'll talk more about SEO POCs later, but there's a huge amount of stuff on Michael's site. Sam has released some opportunities, some quick win opportunities with your Search Console data. So again, you can take his report, you can simply plug in your DataStudio data very easily, and you can have this almost instantly, and you can start generating insight off the bat. And there's some really interesting ones coming through from DataStudio Hacks, which they're about to release a report that talks about Screaming Frog, that basically takes your Screaming Frog output, and all of us have Screaming Frog, so this should be quite exciting for us, and puts it into, visualizes it through DataStudio. And I imagine you've already got to the next stage of thinking, well, that's great, but then if I bring it into BigQuery, then I've got it visualized over time. And effectively, I've got my own cloud-based crawling tool, or my own crawling tool, really, to examine how those factors have changed over time. You can start looking at them in that way. So this is quite an exciting development. If you go along and follow them on this link, they're looking for enough people to follow them before they release it, which I think is going to be fairly soon. But the point is that people are releasing things every day, and DataStudio helps you meet that objective of building your data capacity, because it's all accessible, and it's accessible at a very low cost. So I think as a data plan, a data strategy, DataStudio is the one to go for right now. Now, the second use case, to align SEO activity to commercial metrics and goals. This is one that comes up a lot, and this is the big pressure I think SEO teams have. How do I get SEO accepted as a commercial channel? And it may be that SEO is treated differently within each organization. Sometimes it's treated as almost like UX. You're there to improve the content and to add value to the product, but it's not seen as something that provides commercial value to the business. And unless you can solve that problem, that objective, you're always going to struggle to get sign-off on people, on resource, internal resource, external, even back to the previous point in terms of your tool budget, and then expanding to use BigQuery and these other tools. So you really have to think, how can I make SEO commercial? And the way that I've done that is by using as a tactic, using DataStudio. So I created DataStudio reports, and I created a framework, because honestly, when you create a framework, it's taken more seriously by senior stakeholders. And my framework has 4 sections. It's performance, planning, control, action. Performance section is put front and center. And this is where you set out the vision for commercial metrics. And you do this just by creating this. And you need to think, how can I, if I've been reporting on rankings, how do I effectively hide that and start to report on commercially meaningful metrics, such as revenue, leads, sales, CPA. And you can do this it's just physically by creating your framework, creating your pages within the framework, and then putting this material front and center. The next section is planning. That's in terms of SEO forecasting, Google Trends. Control section I use for automated alerts, checking scripts, and the action section is the mashups, but generally it's the links to the kind of reports I've just taken you through. So every time I find one of those, such as the excellent one that Hannah did, or something that Sam did, I then link to it, I import it, I put my data through it, and then I see has that become useful in driving insight for the SEO teams, because it's all building their SEO toolset. But let's look initially at the performance section, because I think that's the one that's most interesting. And again, I've mocked up this report, and I'll make this available to you after the session. As you can see here, immediately you've gone to commercial metrics. There's almost nothing. SEO here is. I used to actually do a report where I set it to be SEO, and I've now moved on to kind of having the default channel groupings. So you can then select SEO from the channels, but you get the SEO, and I think that kind of rams home the importance of SEO as a commercial channel, because they're seeing it alongside other activity. And we can see the visits, we can see the orders, we can see the percentage of visits that convert to orders. But the point is that everything is set up within performance, the framework. Everything here is commercial. And the message that you're giving senior stakeholders is that SEO is a commercial channel. It should be treated exactly the same as the other channels. And you may find that this is a sort of end vision that you have, and you're wondering about, how do I get to this point? How do I get to this end vision? And you start off by asking the right kind of questions. You start saying, how do we measure SEO? What are the commercial goals for SEO? And if you're asking senior stakeholders, CMOs, these kind of questions, then they're going to come back to you with reasonable answers, or at least it's going to provoke the kind of questioning that you want around the organization to understand why you're not measuring in this way. And also, you may find that your business doesn't have all the data available. This is a fantastic report if you're using GA and everything is set up through GA. You may struggle because you may find that leads or conversions are measured in a completely different system. They're not measured in GA, and you're sitting there going, "Oh, how do I possibly create a data project to bring in all this data in an automated way?" And simply put, the way to get around this is just to work with Google Sheets, and to create Google Sheets on a month-by-month basis, and get the teams to manually put in the figures that they need each month for revenue, for leads, and start off on a monthly basis, because that's probably the most you can ask those teams, is to update every month, and then gradually kind of automate these processes and automate the data processes, because you already will have proved the necessity and the strategic objective of doing this. So then you can start to talk about, how do we improve how we're collecting the data, how to improve that process. And data for me has been a case of constantly improving process. And like I say, it really can start from a very basic way with the Google Sheet, where you have 3 or 4 different entries coming from the different teams around the business to start proving that model. Once this is reported on, and it's within a framework that's accepted in the business, then you'll find that you start to gain traction on it. And obviously with DataStudio, you're sending these reports on a regular basis to key stakeholders. We can see the rest of the report here at the bottom, and look at channels driving revenue, looking at products. I've used when you set up DataStudio, for those that don't know, you have the default data sources from Google for Google Analytics, and you can see the report working with that data source, and you literally swap that data source out for your one. As Chris says here, a really useful tip is to use 1240 by 754 pixels, because then it's a perfect size for PDF output. And then when you export the report, it comes out in PDF size, and that can be sent or printed out, given to other people around the business. Now, use case 3. So to ensure SEO recommendations are prioritized. Now, I think this is almost the biggest problem that we have as SEOs. How do we get stuff done? And this is a constant struggle, because you can fire off audits, you can create audits, but if none of it's actioned, then the channel doesn't make any progress. So, and I think this is a common problem for most people. And the way I've looked at this is very much from the perspective of the management consultancies. And I think there's an awful lot we can learn in SEO from those teams, because they are exceptionally good at execution and deployment. And that's something that in the SEO side we sometimes lack. So we will generate an audit, but we won't be able to prioritize that audit. And we won't also be able to prioritize it with the kind of commercial metrics that allow senior stakeholders to prioritize our SEO recommendations over other activity that can happen through the business. So you have to understand that devs are under constant pressure to perform, and we can have the best audit in the world, but we have to be able to get the senior people managing them to support our SEO recommendations. And this again comes back to the previous use case. If we haven't got that commercial view on our data, then it's incredibly hard for us to create a business case that's going to be listened to at that level. So once we have that data, we have that commercial view, we can then start to think, how do we adopt a test and learn approach to our SEO? And McKinsey wrote a really good report recently, and I've worked with McKinsey. They really like this approach, this kind of test and learn approach for digital. And they wrote a report recently on the back of the corona outbreak and what's happening with that kind of test and learn approach. And they found that their top performing companies that they work with are moving this kind of test and learn approach from quarterly to weekly. So it allows them to be much more agile. So in a time of enormous change that we're going into, this test and learn approach is not only absolutely key to success in that environment, but the rate at which it's happening is speeding up. So I've linked to the report here, so it's well worth a read to really understand how you can talk to your clients about test and learn and change. This is the SEO sprint method that I've adopted. It's kind of very agile method. So first of all, you start with a strategic objective, and that may be, for example, something around call center deflection. I want less people to call the call center. And then I start to collect the data that's needed to support the proof of concept and generate insight from that data. So I may go and look at the search queries across the site to see how people are acting in those journeys, whether they're bouncing, whether they're finding the information that they really want, or are they being forced to go through that process and call the call center. So you find data to support that plan. You then execute a short sprint, a short test. You take that learning, you evaluate, and then you scale up the activity. And so these kind of short SEO sprints that last 2 weeks, usually, are constantly kind of revised and scaled up. And this allows you to have a very structured deployment method for your SEO activity, because everyone's constantly aware of what you're doing. There's more on SEO sprints actually here from Christopher. I've linked at the bottom here. I think we think in a very similar way, and that's probably our sort of corporate environments that we're in. It's very much about sprints, and I've found this to be enormously effective in moving clients forward. But you're going to ask, how does this come into DataStudio? Good question. So I track all my SEO POCs through the framework. So the action part of the framework actually has each one of these POCs listed, and that means I can build the data before we actually start to establish that it can be measured. So we have the reports available, we've established a measurement, we then start the POC. So an example can be page speed delivery, and the Crux report gives you data that can go straight into DataStudio. And we started to look here at performance on FCP or key performance metrics against competitors. And this was the data that we built up in those reports to push the business forward, because they'd always had a view of their own performance, but they'd never seen their own performance against competitors. And I'll give Jerry White a nod on this one. He's used this as well at Just Eat. And it's amazing the effectiveness of showing you against your competitors, especially when your competitors are improving their metrics and your metrics are effectively getting worse, as in here. So this is a very big motivator for those teams to really get that stuff done. But also importantly, when you have that framework, that kind of delivery framework, you can then start to plot this out on a timeline. And I very rarely see Gantt charts coming in from SEO agencies that I work with. It's amazing. It's not something that happens a lot, and it really should. If you have a Gantt chart approach, you can then decide when your sprints are happening. You can explain to the business what's happening, so they're fully aware of this, and you have time built in for planning, and then you have time to revise what's happened with each one of those sprints, which is an absolutely key step, because then you're taking that learning, you're building that, you're establishing that business case, and we actually create PowerPoint business cases for each of these. And then these business cases become an asset that you're using to push forward all your other SEO activity that's happening. And the final point that's really important with this approach is that if you have a Gantt chart and deliverables, then you've already dealt with prerequisites, which is something that SEO teams don't do very much. We tend to find SEO activity that we want to do, and we push the devs, but we haven't established the prerequisites that needed to happen to allow that SEO activity, that sprint, to be successful. So you don't go into a sprint unless you've fully signed off, for example, the allocation, the prioritization of the dev team, or the resource that you need, or the access you need to be able to do that sprint. And this kind of structured approach allows you to do that with the team and have far more success in terms of what you're rolling out. So I'm a big fan of this kind of approach to SEO delivery. But all of this has happened within DataStudio, and DataStudio has become the central point for pushing these tactics forward, really. So it's a linchpin to all of this, and it gives it credibility through the business. So I don't want to go on too long, because I think you probably died with too much PowerPoint today. So I thought if we end now, then we can kind of talk about use cases and problems that you've had, and we can see if there's some way you can kind of suggest solutions to those. So I'd be very happy to take questions from anyone.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Nick. Yeah. If anyone wants to leave questions, just do so in the session chat. And we'll see if anything's coming through now. Yeah, Nick can take a breath quickly.
Barry's complaining I'm sworn enough, probably. I was so tempted to say getting shit done, Barry, but I couldn't do it. I think I've got to push myself to do that.
Exactly.
Simon, yeah, 1240 by 784. Yeah, I mean, that's A4, which is A4 for PDF. We can raise this with Chris because it's a big tip from him, but it does seem to print out very nicely. And I've also, which is going to sound ridiculous, I've also printed out these reports and delivered them in a binder to board meetings, which I know sounds a complete anathema for the data, the period that we live in. But, weirdly enough, you can print it out, they look good, then you can give them to senior stakeholders and they really buy into what you're doing. So again, it's kind of giving you that credibility. And I think there's what I kind of want to ram home is there's a real element of social engineering with DataStudio. And I think sometimes we miss that because we're talking about the tactics, or we're talking about the individual reports. And I think we miss the overall reason of why we might do this for senior stakeholder buy-in. So Sam, saying any success cases? Well, absolutely. It's worked very successfully for me across Vodafone. So that kind of approach, and we've had double-digit revenue growth in several of the markets. So I would absolutely, that's the reason I'm still using it. It's come out of sort of test and learn for myself of trying to get things moving in a large organization, and I've tried to learn from the management consultancies about how they deploy to really take those learnings into the SEO field to get that traction. So yeah, I've been very successful with it. So I'd be very happy. I hope you will be too. But sometimes the SEOs can work on their own in a kind of silo, and you can be doing the best SEO in the world, really. But if you're not able to convey it to the rest of the business, you're never going to get the buy-in. You're never going to get the resource that you need to really scale it up, and you're going to hit that ceiling. And you're going to say, well, obviously I'm doing a great job, but I needed 2 other people. I've now become a senior SEO. I need more resource, or I need to give my agency are doing fantastically, but they need twice as much budget now to really be effective. So there's an element of you have to manage upwards if you're leading SEO in any organization, and DataStudio is a really good way of you managing upwards, of reporting upwards.
Yeah, I liked what you had where you've now got the drop down, so it's not just defaulted to SEO. So if it's a marketing director, you can basically, if SEO is working well for you as a channel, then it makes sense to compare that versus
That's
other activity.
and that's getting me getting increasingly bold and cheeky. So I think initially I kind
That's
of
good.
kept it on SEO, and you may find politically that you create your first dashboard as SEO if there's other people creating dashboards. And I've now got to the point where I'm creating dashboards and I'm making bigger and more ambitious ones. But you know, that's a political decision that you have to make. I would definitely include other channels in there because once it's been done once, it's a it's a good job. And
Also, it's data. You're not lying or showing
yeah,
biased views. You're showing
it's their
performance.
data, and you know,
Yeah.
it's really interesting the discussions that it encourages once you start down this journey. I've literally started this with another large client now, and having created that dashboard, the next questions are fantastic. So the next questions are, that's really good, and you know, the C-suite will go to the head of marketing and go, well, how do we measure SEO? And that's a fantastic question to happen for you. If that's coming down in that direction, that's your job done. They've already done they've opened that door. So they start saying, how do we measure this? And then you're looking at it, and then you're saying, well, okay, I think we need to get some of the analytics people on the next call because we need to make sure that there's parity in the data, because we're reporting in other places, but you know, can we ensure that this reporting has parity with the rest of the reporting around the business? But once that questioning starts, you've already won because you've made the argument. Then they've accepted it. So Simon, you're saying levels of dashboard. This is why I have the framework. So the performance parts, which is pretty much your homepage, is for the C-suite. And then as you drill down in it, then it's for, as you say, the plebs of staff to get more involved in it. But because you have a framework, you don't end up with a million different reports. And you can just link. I mean, they're links within reports. So when I get to the action section, I'm literally just linking out then to all my other DataStudio reports. And if you use DataStudio, the first thing you'll realize is once you get into it in a big way, you have so many reports on the go that this almost becomes your index file for all your other reports. So, you know, you just link out to your other reports, you create them, but the framework provides that structure to all your reports in lieu of, you know, Google giving us a decent kind of folder system for DataStudio. But at the moment I have, you know, 500, 600 reports in my DataStudio account, and obviously it's just ordered by last open. So this can provide your kind of index in your organization for all of those reports. So, but I would say the part in the action section in the other sections are for generally for the people who are operational in the business, and the performance section is for the C-suite. The other section that has got traction with senior people in the business has been Google Trends data. So you can bring in Google Trends data. Again, Chris released a fantastic connector for that. And so, for example, one of the reports I've just made recently has looked at all the major handset manufacturers against each other, because you can bring in Google Trends for that market for, say, iPhone, and then you can bring in Google Trends for Huawei, Oppo, you know, other handsets, and then you can plot those against each other. And where that's been very interesting is it's shown that search interest for iPhone has been declining year on year, but search interest for Huawei has gone up dramatically over the last couple of years. So then it starts to provide business intelligence in terms of these are handsets that have a huge opportunity in terms of search, and you're positioning search as a source of intelligence for the rest of the business, because Google Trends is an amazing resource for us if you think about it as just a surveying tool, because Google is capturing all those millions of searches. So the business can start to say that if there's that much search interest for Huawei and we can see a search opportunity, then maybe we need to build out more sections on Huawei, and maybe we can then authorize, you know, content hubs to be created on that. So it will generate a lot of other questions. So Google Trends data, other insight data from your SEO tools can be used across the business very effectively.
We were talking about that earlier in a later session, where information from keyword research tools and just, are you getting more impressions for different searches during COVID, could show when markets are coming back. So like more demand for hotels, the first sign of that probably isn't going to be a booking, it's going to be in a search engine. If customers are starting to look again, or people are starting to think, maybe I could go away this year. So yeah, it's really valuable, exactly. Not just for
the questions people are answering. I mean, we know that Google is moving towards being an answer engine, and people are searching in terms of questions, not in terms of keywords. So I've been looking at one client this morning, and it's a large university, And there's obviously a lot of questions that have come up now that never existed before, like there's a second lockdown, what happens to my university accommodation? Can I say, these are questions that never happened before. So search is providing a really good process to build in and understand what people want, their intent, and allowing us to build content off the back of it. Let's see Andrew's question. So our clients ask lots of questions that can easily be obtained from Google Analytics and DataStudio. So understanding how to visualize this data. So understand what they're asking for, that's fine. And this would, if it fell outside the performance section of my framework, then I would create a individual report in the action section. And that's what the framework's for. So within that action section, I would link off then to another DataStudio report that just specifically looked at that view or perspective that they wanted, that data they wanted. And I'm presuming that some of those questions would actually lead to actionable stuff on your side, because then you're going to be doing something on the SEO side to improve that point, or to generate more traffic, conversions, leads, etc. So a good example of that would be featured snippets. So we started collecting featured snippets. We've got reports that look at the number of featured snippets we've got versus competitors. We're actively trying to capture those, and then we have a separate DataStudio report that just looks and see how your progress is over time in capturing featured snippets, and that's something that's fairly easy to put together, but that's the framework. So you can end up with an SEO tool that's completely customized to the way that you work and the objectives that you have, or the tactics that you have on the SEO side with your client, and those tactics can be supported by a specific DataStudio report.
Makes sense. I think we're going to have to wrap it up, actually, because the next session starts in 1 minute. So I need to hop over
to
the session to moderate that one. But yeah, thanks a lot for that, Nick. As you said, could you just explain where you're going to share the slides and templates? Is that right?
Yeah. So I'll share the report, and if anyone liked the template that I've just made there and shown you, I'd be quite happy to share that with you as an exclusive Don't Panic Upload Search giveaway. So yeah, get in touch with me through Twitter would be fine. Send me a message, or else I'll talk to Beth and work out how we can share it with all of you as delegates.
That's brilliant. Thanks a lot for that, Nick.
Yep, no problem. But thanks a lot. Yep. Have a good day.